Kind of taking a step back, I liked what you said about when it comes to network effects, users beget users. How do you think, or I should say, what do you think will attract the next cohort of crypto users? And is it, gaming, NFTs, DeFi, social tokens? Is it anything else? And I think the context for this comes as Reddit NFTs just launched this week and onboarded, I think, a new 3 million or so crypto wallets with their digital collectibles. So a nice little rebrand there for NFTs. But what do you see as the next cohort of crypto users onboarding?
I think the next cohort, from what we're seeing right now, say in terms of like Phantom, and I think the trend is kind of more generally, is that I think there's a lot of growth in terms of like combining gaming and NFTs. And I think that makes sense for a number of reasons. You can take advantage of you can take advantage of blockchain technology when you integrate games with it. For example, when it comes to down to like being able to prove ownership, so people can prove that they actually own the digital assets that actually belongs in the wallet itself, that it's not vulnerable for that they're not vulnerable for it just being taken away from them for whatever reason. So it's censorship resistant. Is also resistant in terms of like if there's some sort of catastrophic failure with a particular database, the data is not going to be like rewritten or undone, and so it kind of prevents those kind of like rollback situations from happening. Because I remember, like, for example, playing World of Warcraft back like 15 years ago, there were like a number of occasions where there were rollbacks that happened. And there were for all sorts of like reasons, probably like some sort of like database error, some sort of like corruption with the data. And so, you'll be playing your character for like half an hour, 1 hour, and then suddenly like your screen would freeze and then you're teleported back to where you were like half an hour, 1 hour before. And so, all of that data kind of like disappeared, all of that progress disappeared, and there's no record of like, what you did for the past half an hour or like an hour, right? Whereas like if you implement the data on the blockchain itself, rollbacks like that are kind of not possible, because the fact that you have multiple computers confirming the data, and that there are many like there are many like copies of the same data, means that you basically get redundancy, right? And not to mention, the hype around NFTs and being able to trade them on the P2P level really kind of makes it easier within the chain itself to anyone else on the chain, and also to people across different chains, right? And so I think this is a big growth area. I think gaming itself is a big growth area. We've seen kind of like the interest in gaming grow exponentially, particularly over the past 10 years. You can kind of see that in terms of like the number of users that have been watching all sorts of different games, and in terms of like the prize pools as well, because the prize pools kind of reflect like user interest, because the money has to come from somewhere, in which case it comes from the fans, just like any other kind of like sporting competition. And so I think, as games kind of like continue to grow exponentially, and as people realize the benefits of being able to like create NFTs of digital data in the games, I think that's a huge growth area. As you mentioned, like with Reddit, onboarding users by creating digital collectibles or creating like NFTs. I think you're going to see more and more companies basically go into that space, and more interesting, high quality games develop utilizing blockchain technology that will gain a lot of traction. So I think that's a big growth area in the immediate future. I think there are other growth areas as well around supply chain management. I know there are a number of companies out there that are looking to do more and more things in regards to supply chain management, to be able to like validate the data. And also there's a whole industry around insurance and P2P insurance as well. And there are a lot of benefits in being able to establish P2P insurance on chain, namely being able to solve kind of the moral hazard problem, where because you have that increased level of transparency and accountability to people who pay in and people who pay out, you get a lot more efficiencies there, where people are able to actually decrease the premiums that are being paid into the service, because the payouts are a lot more efficient than the current system. So I think there are a lot of growth areas, potential growth areas out there. I think the immediate one right now, though, is gaming right now.
I'm very excited to see the games that are coming out. Not too long ago, I was scrolling through Twitter, per usual, and some guy had clipped a first-person shooter game. And so some developer, so I DM him. I'm like, this game looks awesome. It was like just a demo. What are you building on? And he was building on Fantom. So obviously there's like a lot of really cool stuff coming. I saw you guys also drop like kind of a teaser of all these different games that are coming out. Do you think also kind of the architecture that you have from a technical standpoint of having that like fast finality, do you think that's also kind of an advantage for wanting to like lure gaming developers over to Fantom as opposed to wherever else they may want to go?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the things about blockchains and gaming is that depending on like the nature of the game, right, there may be a lot of transactions that be submitted on to the network, right, and there are like SDKs out there and people we're talking to that are basically like abstracting the saving of data on chain and the retrieving of data on chain from the end user, right? Because the end user doesn't want to like, first of all, like, why do people play games, right? Or at its base level, people play games because they want to have fun, right? And kind of like the economics of the game and maybe even being able to make money from the game is usually kind of like secondary to that, right? So the gameplay is what matters the most. And so you don't want to have people out there where every time, say in an RPG example, they kill a monster, they loot a monster, you don't want to have them, to have a pop-up from MetaMask come up and say, sign a transaction and wait, etc., and then submit it, right? You want to have that happening in the background. That being said, if you're unable to process large number of transactions fast, then the amount of like users you can get for a particular game and be able to consistently save that data on chain becomes harder and harder and harder, right? So definitely you need to have like fast finality. You need to be able to confirm transactions as quickly as possible. And for Fantom, the time to finality right now is approximately a second. So that means that, if you submit a transaction to the network within approximately a second, it should be fully confirmed by the network, and therefore there's no waiting in order to make sure that if your transaction gets confirmed. There's no backlog of like data being like trying to be saved on chain, and so there can't be any conflicts between like, or it's very unlikely for there to be conflicts between like unsaved data that's being pushed to the chain and data that's already on the chain. And so it also comes down to network throughput as well. Because if a lot of people are submitting transactions simultaneously to the network, and there's not enough transaction throughput, then basically there'll just be a backlog that just keeps building and building and building to the point where it takes a very long time for data in the game to be actually saved on chain. In which case, if the game were to go offline for whatever reason, then all that data that's still pending to be saved on chain might not necessarily be saved on chain. So it's a big growth area for us. That's why it's a big focus for us. It's a way for us to get like a lot of users, a lot of transactions on the network, but we also have to like work on the technology to be able to handle this number of games. Because if you aren't able to handle many millions of transactions on a daily basis, then you're basically ceiling in terms of like number of games that can deploy on you and how popular it can get, isn't that high. You want to make the ceiling as high as possible, and that's why the technology really is very important, because it really matters in terms of being able to generate a great user experience for the end user. Because in the end, if users are not having a good time playing a game because of the slowness of the network, they might say, well, there's advantages, there's my data being secure and being able to earn these NFTs, etc. But the gameplay is just so horrible that it doesn't matter for me. I'm just going to play the traditional non-blockchain based games that I've been used to the whole way through. And so as the user experience gets better, I think you'll see more and more people basically play these blockchain-based games.
On the topic of, I guess, throughput, we've seen a spike in MEV, especially with the transition in Ethereum to proof of stake. MEV has become a hotly debated topic, especially since some MEV, such as Flashbots, actually implement OFAC sanctions. We're curious to know, is MEV an issue on the Fantom network, and could you explain why or why not?
MEV pretty much is an issue to the same extent as it currently exists on Ethereum, right? Because although the consensus engine is very different, in terms of like how smart contracts are actually like executed right now, it pretty much like works in a similar manner, right? And there is like a TX pool out there, there is memory out there, and so you are able to like continuously read from the chain if you really want to. In terms of like solving the problem of MEV, I mean, to some extent, it's not a problem. To another extent, it is a problem. And what I mean by that is like, to some extent, it's not a problem in terms of like, it's just kind of like about efficiency, right? So, there will always be price discrepancies. between applications, between between like different DeFi applications, etc., between the pricing or between the same assets, for example, and those kind of get like evened out at the time. So we have seen, for example, on Ethereum, on Fantom, that there are like bots that run from time to time that basically take advantage of price discrepancies. We can see that in the data. And I think it's the same sort of thing for Ethereum. And that, to me, like, some people say, oh, this is awful, this should be happening. The bots are basically taking advantage of users. Well, another way to think about it is that the bots are just naturally creating equilibrium, right? They're kind of like nature's like healing itself, so to speak. And you see the same sort of behavior take place anyway in like more traditional markets or any sort of market out there, to be honest, right? On the other hand, it is like you can kind of consider it to be like a form of like front running, so to speak. Now, I don't really understand. I don't really know the legalities around MEV, and to what extent it's legal or not. What behaviors might be legal or not. So I can't really comment on that. But I can say that we do have the same problems as on Ethereum. It's not something that we've really focused on at the moment, just because we've focused on the many other issues and performance improvements, etc. But we are looking at like what the commentary is around it, and in particular what Ethereum has kind of been responding, how Ethereum has kind of been responding to MEV. And by the way, by MEV, I think we should be clear about like what it means. It's an acronym, right? It stands for minor extractable value, and essentially what it means is that if you can run a computer that can kind of like read blockchain data faster than other people, then you can basically take advantage of that for your own benefit, essentially, right? So it is, like, loosely speaking, a term, a form of front running, and there's a lot of like technical ways of kind of doing MEV, which I guess we don't really have to get into, but that's kind of like the basic idea for people out there.
And then maybe we can transition to staking. So staking is something we're really excited to partner with you guys on. By the time this goes live, we will have announced our staking partnership. So very excited to be doing that. And then on the back of that, there's a governance vote recently in the Fantom community. So the stake rate was actually, the community voted to change that from, I believe, was it 13 to 6%? Or if I'm getting those numbers wrong, I'm sure.
For like 1 year staking, it was about like around 13% APY to about half of that. So it's about six point something. Yeah.
Awesome. And then, so how do you see that affecting the longevity of the network? What is the plan for, or paths forward for the community once the total amount of FTM has been issued? Will the community be able to vote to perhaps mint more? Are you looking at maybe some sort of EIP 1559 like proposal, maybe where the transaction fee may be burnt or maybe sent back to like protocol treasury and then paid back to validators later as like a way to mint more FTM, essentially? So yeah, I want to hear all your takes on all of that.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of like ERP 1559, that is something on the roadmap for implementation. Just because like the gas pricing system for 1559, I think, has kind of been proven to be more efficient than the previous gas price implementation. That being said, we do actually burn some of the transaction fees. It's about 30% of the transaction fees. So there is like a burn that's going on right now. But in terms of like new tokens being minted, I mean, reducing kind of like the block rewards, as you mentioned, from about like 13% to like a bit less than half of that, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was basically extended like the block rewards for the network from about like 2 years to like over 4 years, right? And for us, I think in the long run, where we want to come to is having a network that's scalable enough to be able to handle like many more transactions that occur right now in the network, right? Because in the end, what we want to have is like a large number of transactions in the network on a daily basis, multiplied by a small transaction fee, equals like a large number of FTM that's paid back to the validators, right? Mm-hmm. While still maintaining like low average cost per user, right? like that's what really matters in the end, right? So the more like traction we can get, the more people that interact with the network, the more transactions fees that can be generated for the validators, so they can earn like a good like worthwhile return while validating the network. Now that like period of time may take like several years to take place, which is why like we've extended the runway for the runway for the block rewards with the most recent proposal, or the community like decided to do that, and we kind of like advocated for it as a foundation. That being said, when the max supply is reached, what exactly do we do in that case? Well, if we have enough transaction volume, we might not have to do anything at all. We might get more. We might have more of a burn take place. If the community were to vote to mint more tokens to validators over time, that's something that obviously would be on the table, depending on what the community wants to go. So there's kind of like a number of ideas. We do kind of have like some time to kind of like think about it, or for the community to think about it. But there are like a number of solutions for it. And in the meantime, what we aim to do is try and get as many transactions, to increase as many transactions as possible in the network. I mean, just to give it like example in terms of transaction fees, if we were able to like, if the network suddenly decided to increase transaction fees by tenfold, right? That sounds like a lot, right? But the cost per average transaction, you're talking about going from like, say like, 0.00 like 1 cent to like 0.1 cent, right? That in itself would already account for a significant minority, maybe like 20 or 30% of the existing block rewards anyway. So if the network were to decide to significantly increase transaction fees on the network, I think the cost per user would still be very, very low, but the transaction fees generated for the validators would be substantially higher. So that's like another idea that could be proposed by the community. So yeah, in summary, a lot of different ideas out there. There's not one that we're particularly advocating at this point in time as a foundation.
Well, that's a really cool part about sovereign governance for your own chain as well. Is like there doesn't have to be just one idea. Everyone can come to like an off-chain consensus through forums. So where can people kind of go to like voice their opinion on where they want to see the Fantom Foundation go in the future? Where can they go to do that?
Yeah, so just quickly on governance, we are implementing right now, we're testing right now our changes to governance where people will be able to vote directly on changing network parameters, right? So right now with governance, it's more of an addictive vote, and then the foundation has to make the changes to network governance. But we're progressively moving towards more decentralization where in the next upgrade to governance, people will be automatically able to change, for example, like the max token supply, the emission rate, the amount of like delegated stake to self stake, and like a number of like different parameters. I think 6 or 7. So that's important to note. In terms of like where people can discuss like all these sorts of ideas, the number of like Telegram groups and Discord groups. So if you go to like Fantom.Foundation and you scroll down to the bottom, there's kind of like a link to our socials. So there's like a link to our Telegram group. There's a link to our Discord groups. There's a link to Twitter, and to an extent like other social media sites that we use like LinkedIn and Facebook. So these are all ways that people can kind of like participate in community discussions, especially in terms of discussions around governance, for example. So that's where those are the sorts of links that I would give to people that are out there.
Awesome. John Marco, do you have?
Yeah, so I just wanted to let the technical conversation go on a little bit further. I was curious about your take on governance. Obviously, coordination, especially decentralized coordination, is an issue. I remember at the beginning of this year, there was a lot of chat around DAO tooling because I think there was a common sentiment around DAO friction and trying to coordinate large groups of people and token holders to come together to vote on something, or to even have just a civil discourse. On the topic of like DAO coordination, do you see this as a common governance model going forward in a potentially more decentralized future?
I do think there's a lot of potential there, but I think the problems are kind of like hard to solve, right? And it really comes down to like a number of issues. One of them being like plainly speaking, like if there's a DAO that's funds that have funds in there, right? How do you incentivize people to make sure that or how do you create like a voting system in such a way that people can't just take over the DAO and kind of like vote for the funds or for themselves, right? Now, I don't really know like what the optimal or the best voting solution out there is, but I'm pretty sure that after like people kind of like think about it and create like all sorts of like theoretical ideas and then kind of like test it empirically, people will soon find out, what clearly doesn't work, what may not work, and what might actually work in the end, right? And so I think over time, like we've seen like an evolution of DAO participation. I mean, I remember back kind of like 6 or 7 years ago with like the first DAO that was out there called the DAO. Participation was very, very simple. It was just like, like one vote, one token. And it was very kind of like unclear what the DAO could actually do or not. But now we've come up with like much more different ideas out there, and some of them may work better than others. I think probably like the easiest solution out there that like probably like does work at the moment is if like people kind of like vote for like a governance board and kind of like it's supposed to act in the best interest of DAO holders and people can vote them out. It's kind of like a form of like elective democracy, so to speak. Like you see often in or representative democracy that you see often like Western countries these days. Obviously that has its downsides, just like representative democracy has a lot of downsides. All sorts of like, for example, like agency problems where maybe the people elected don't necessarily act in the best interest of the people that elected them. You have the same sort of like issues with a DAO, and that's because in the end, who are DAO participants? They're humans, right? Like who are people that vote in representative democracies? They're humans as well, right? So you have the same sort of problems from you the same sort of problems like on the whole in terms of voting, like apply to a DAO specifically as well. So I don't really know what the right answer is, but I'm sure people will kind of like think about better ideas to kind of be able to have it all safeguards in DAOs. And so there's a lot of experimentation that can go on, which is very interesting. But I do think that we push more and more towards DAOs. Now, what I do think is potentially a risk is the regulators, right? Because there is now a case of like the CFTC in the US going after the DAO participants for a particular DAO out there, right? And I'm not really sure, like, the clear legalities around DAOs. I know there are some countries out there that are drafting legislation to really like kind of define what a DAO is in terms of law. But many countries out there, there's no definition what a DAO is, just because this sort of technology and these sorts of ideas are very, very new. So there's always a regulatory risk out there that the participants in the DAO might get into trouble simply for voting on whatever proposals are there in the DAO. And so I think once we get more regulatory clarity, it should encourage a lot more DAO participation. But with this like level of regulatory uncertainty, it does kind of create like a chilling effect where people are not willing to explore as much as maybe they would otherwise explore, just because of the potential legal consequences of those actions.
Got it. Is there any tool, if you could wave a wand and create any specific or any kind of DAO tool or to get rid of any type of DAO coordination problem, what's the one problem that you would like to see solved today if you could?
Being able to solve the problem of how do you prevent the DAO network, how do you prevent people in the DAO network just from voting to take all the funds for themselves, right? Or how do you how do you make sure the DAO network doesn't engage in a level of censorship that people broadly kind of like disagree with? Because we have seen instances where people have been able to hijack DAO, so to speak, get like some sort of stake in the DAO and vote to take all the funds for themselves, or basically like convince other people in the DAO to kind of like censor particular addresses or stop particular addresses from like earning fees, or from even being able to hold the tokens within the wallet itself, or freezing tokens. And these are all like ideas out there where there's not necessarily like a right or wrong solution. It kind of depends what perspective you're coming from. But there are potential issues out there where people might be thinking, oh, why would I want to participate in the DAO when all my funds associated with the DAO might be held hostage by a majority of people, right? Or even in some cases a significant minority, right? Like, why would I want to put myself out there where I'm being held hostage, where I cannot be part of this sort of DAO and really like take control and ownership of my own assets, or own digital assets out there that cannot be censored by a particular DAO or any particular individual. So these are all like problems that I think kind of like need to be solved. And I think over time, people are going to come up with all sorts of different ideas where you basically get kind of like an optimization, so to speak.
Interesting. I was actually looking at proof of humanity as something that a few DAOs were looking at implementing to be able to filter out bots, or potentially if there is a cap on how many tokens an individual wallet can hold in order to participate in governance, using that as a mechanism. No, very interesting. I appreciate your answer there.
And just to quickly add on that, like, there are all sorts of like ideas out there. Like one of them as well is like, for example, like soul-bound tokens, which I know like Vitalik and others have talked about. There are some downsides with soul-bound tokens. So it's like, how can people like transfer it between different wallets? What happens if you lose the wallet with the soul-bound token? Then kind of like you're in like a lot of trouble, right? But the base idea like about a soul-bound token, or it's kind of like related to proof of humanity, right? It's about like validating that you're real, that you have a reputation, and therefore, if your reputation is at stake, and you behave badly, then there's not just like monetary consequences. There could be consequences to your reputation going forward. Potentially depending on what you do, for the rest of your life, right? And so having like an incentive, encouraging people to behave in a good manner as the network expects them to behave, is kind of like where we want to go in the end, right? And that kind of idea extends to like, proof of work and proof of stake, and having the right economic incentives and reputational incentives out there, so people kind of behave in a way that like other people in the community kind of expect them to. And that's how we kind of like live in a society, I guess.
So we've been able to squeeze a fair amount of alpha out of you today. We got about 5 minutes left, so I'd like to just pass it over to Michael. Like open forum. What are you excited about? What gets you up in the morning? Like things the community should be looking forward to, maybe that we have already touched on today or that we haven't touched on. And yeah, let's just open it up to you.
Yeah. So like what really motivates me is kind of like the level of like progress being made in the space, right? And in particular related to Fantom, sort of like the technology developments that we've got coming out, which I believe should be like a game changer for us. That should vastly increase the network and performance that we have right now, while still maintaining kind of like the high level of security that we have right now. Making sure that the chain doesn't go offline, making sure that the network remains permissionless and leaderless, meaning that anybody can join and leave at any time, and anybody can set up a validated node. Like really being like that open source technology. And like right now, more specifically, I would like to see the virtual machine and the storage system come out at least on the test net, sometime, by the end of the year or very early next year. So I can demonstrate to people, look, this is the old technology, this is new technology. When I interact with an application, you can see that the new technology, you get a vastly better like response time. Whereas with the old technology, it's still kind of fast because of the consensus, but you can still see that it's slower than the new technology, right? And actually being able to visualize that for users, because like, what I've done like often is kind of like talk about these ideas a bit technically, and it's all kind of a bit abstract, throwing out all these terms. But in the end, what really matters is that the user has a great experience, right? And so if I can demonstrate that visually, the speed at which it happens, I think that will get a lot of eyeballs, and people in the end will be like, wow, it really does work, and I can see the benefits for myself. So it's like the amount of progress that's out there, which is accelerating actually for us on a month-by-month basis, is very exciting. Like we're developing the technology at a faster rate than we have been ever in the past. Like last year and the year before, just because we've added more smart people on the team, we've created new teams out there. So last year we didn't have much of a middleware team working on these sorts of like virtual machine ideas. Now we have a team of over like 6 people that are working on these ideas, and we're adding more and more people to consensus as well, and basically iterating over the existing technology that we have at the moment. So in my opinion, things can only get better, the performance can only improve, and that's what really makes me exciting to kind of like see the results that happen in the end, and to discover also where we can make further optimizations in kind of exploring ideas that maybe we initially didn't really think about.
Ian, anything else?
Maybe one last word of wisdom, let's say, to get people through the bear market, to get the community through the bear market. to get the builders through it, because the number is not going up and to the right for any of the tokens right now. So how can people kind of rally together and like, you know, build with purpose, I guess, during this time period?
Yeah, I think what's important to note is that the number of users, using blockchain technology, the size of the ecosystem has grown year on year, right? And I've often told people that more people used blockchain technology in 2018 than 2017, and people are kind of surprised to hear that. Because they're like, oh, wait a second, but like you kind of like read, the pointy heads in the media, they say like, oh, blockchain is dead, RIP, beanie babies, etc. It's all collapsed, etc. It was all just like fluff to begin with. I read a lot of those articles, particularly in 2018, right? And you kind of see the same sort of like narrative being created now. But the key thing is that, look at the actual data, look at the numbers, look at the technology that's being developed. Every year there's new ideas coming out. There's new technologies coming out. There's more people using blockchain technology. And so the fundamentals are real and the use cases are expanding. Just to give like one like simple example, a few years ago, nobody knew what DeFi meant, right? There was zero DeFi applications. DeFi is only about 2.5 years old, right? And what do we have now? We have an ecosystem that has like billions of dollars worth of value being traded and being utilized. There must be have been over like $1 trillion worth of like economic volume being done over the past 2.5 years. And all of this happened in a very short period of time, right? Mm-hmm. And so, the fundamentals are strong. I think cryptos are generally, they will continue to grow over time. And even though there are market cycles and a lot of it is also dependent on external factors not related to blockchains in any way, I think over time, the industry will continue to grow. And therefore, like a lot of people will continue to use blockchain projects. And therefore, you'll see, massive value add created there.
Very well said. Well, I think that's everything. Again, we're really excited to partner with you guys as a staking provider for Fantom. Just plug Fantom Foundation. Where can people go to learn more? Where can people go to follow more about your thoughts or your thinking as the CEO of the Fantom Foundation?
Yes.
And yeah.
Yeah. So people can go to fantom.foundation. So that's our website that has like information on the team, information on like the technology, some of the popular apps that are on the Fantom network that have direct links on the website, and we're adding a lot more there with a new website that we're developing. And you can see kind of like our socials as well. So the social media platform that we usually push out like our updates quite quickly is Twitter. So that's at Fantom FDN. So at Fantom FANTOM FDN is where you can go subscribe or follow. And basically, we put out tweets there almost on a daily basis, or at least several times a week, about projects that are deploying on Fantom, about what we're involved in, about interviews such as this that are taking place, and links to them. So that's where I would go. I'll go to Twitter and I'll go to our website.
Excellent. Well, Michael, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for your time, guys, as well. Really appreciate it, and I'm so happy to be working with you guys once again, and yeah, appreciate the interview.